Now to breaking news from the United Nations and the findings of an independent review of the organization's main aid agency for Palestinians in Gaza, known as UNRWA. And it's a damning report on Israel, whose claims that UNRWA staff took part in the Hamas attacks last October led key donors, including Canada, to pull funding. But the review doesn't give the agency a total clean bill of health. For more, let's turn to journalist Sally Patterson. She joins us live from New York. So, Sally, can you walk us through the findings and the recommendations of this review?
Well, in the last few minutes, we've been hearing some of the details of that review. It was set up in February, basically to look at some of these very serious allegations from Israel, which alleged that 12 different staff from UNRWA took part in Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel, which left more than 1,500 people dead and many others taken hostage, where many of them remain in the Gaza Strip. And what this review basically did was speak to different stakeholders. It had over 200 different conversations with people in who are basically related to this world. It spoke to people in Israel. It spoke to people in the West Bank, UNRWA senior staff, to try and get a picture of what systems and mechanisms are in place within UNRWA that allows it to be neutral. It is, of course, a United Nations body and therefore needs to ensure that it upholds that neutrality in all of its work. Now, we saw several different recommendations, many which basically looked at 8 different themes. And just to run you through a few of those recommendations from that report. Firstly, it said that there needed to be more done to ensure that there was an oversight committee looking at how UNRWA works day to day. It wanted donors, for example, to have more of an oversight of the budget and also breaches in conduct, as we saw allegedly in coming out earlier this year. Now, we also saw recommendations around how unions are used within UNRWA. The report found that several union members used it as a mechanism to influence and sometimes pressure or even threaten senior management, and it said that that needed to be stopped. The ways that UNRWA's facilities and installations were being used by other groups was something that the chair of this group wanted to take very seriously. Catherine Colonna said that this was something that needed to be addressed very urgently indeed. Here's what she had to say.
It did happen that sometimes UNRWA's installations have been used for, or misused, rather, I should say, for political or military purposes by various groups. You know, I'm not thinking of one only here, you know, various parties, various groups. And this is undermining the neutrality of the installation. It should not happen.
Now, the very serious allegation as well that this review looked at was that education resources being used in schools run by UNRWA were in fact spreading incitements to hate. They were spreading what is being called, you know, quite serious, problematic material to children in the many UNRWA schools. And that included, for example, giving Jews qualities that were sort of negative connotations and spreading information which suggested that the state of Israel doesn't exist. And what the chair said was that needed to be addressed urgently. She said that there had been some changes made because there have been allegations made by Israel and other countries in the past about this sort of content being spread to children in Gaza, the West Bank and other areas in which UNRWA works. But she says more needs to be done to address this once and for all, checking that staff as well, particularly those who are being promoted through UNRWA different levels, were being checked to see if they had any connections to extremism, and basically having a better oversight of how the group functions in the Middle East.
Sally, I mentioned the withdrawal of international funding to UNRWA as a result of these claims. Where do things stand when it comes to the funding?
Well, what we saw was after these allegations were made by Israel in January, 16 different countries who usually donate millions of dollars to UNRWA and its work in the region basically said they were going to suspend or stop their funding altogether until these allegations were taken seriously and addressed. At the time, the United Nations Secretary General called the allegations shocking. He said that he was going to take them very seriously, and he set up 2 different reviews into it, one of which we're hearing some of the results from today. Now, earlier, the Secretary General's spokesperson commented on the situation as it stands. Here's what he had to say.
The Secretary General accepts the recommendations contained in Ms. Colonna's report. He has agreed with the Commissioner General, Philippe Lazzarini, that UNRWA, with the Secretary General's own support, will establish an action plan to implement the recommendations contained in Ms. Colonna's final report. Moving forward, the Secretary General appeals to all stakeholders to actively support UNRWA, as it is a lifeline for Palestine refugees in the region.
Now, Canada is one of those nations which has resumed its funding to UNRWA on certain conditions about changing how it functions, but several other nations have not continued to do so. They're still withdrawing millions of dollars of funding, which campaigners say is necessary in order to feed those in Gaza, which is facing a humanitarian crisis when it comes to clean water, food and aid. They say much more needs to be done to continue to get aid into that group. And what the UN says is that UNRWA is irreplaceable and needs to be funded at its full capacity, especially at this time of war. Back to you.
Okay, we'll continue to watch for more reaction to this new report. Sally, thanks so much for breaking it down for us. As journalist Sally Patterson in New York.